Hello, welcome. Thanks for joining this developer session. Topic today is Spring Data Couchbase, POJO-centric data access for Spring developers. So I'm hoping most of you are already Spring developer. If not, that's no problem. We'll go mostly around Spring and not so much about Couchbase. This is going to be a very heavy code-oriented session. I have like 4 slides. So if you guys want to come more in the front, because I'm mostly going to show code. So don't be shy. Come at the front. I hope it's going to be big, and the font is going to be big enough. You should be fine if you're in the middle. If you're in the far back, you should probably come closer. OK, so a quick word about me, who I am. My name is Laurent Doguin. I'm a French developer advocate based in Paris. I mostly take care of the French-speaking communities and the Java communities in MEA. So you can, this is my Twitter account. You can send me an email. And this is a good old Web 2.0 tag cloud of most of the things I like or do in my life. So that's enough about me. Really, the topic today is Spring. Let's build a better enterprise. That's the tagline of the Spring project. So quick show of hands. Who knows here about Spring? I'm guessing all of you, but just to make sure that you, not all of you. OK, cool. So Spring, it's a very enterprise-y focused application development framework, right? We all know that. OK. The Spring ecosystem is split into different layers. So on the bottom, you have the, the Spring core, the really runtimey kind of stuff with security, all these things, cool thing. And there's the data layer. That's what we are going to focus on today. It's the Spring Data project, and you have the relational projects, as well as the non-relational NoSQL, kind of projects. And then on top of it, you have some smaller, more narrow-focused projects. You have Spring XT for data transfer between different solutions. You have all the big data stuff. You have something called Spring Social. Spring Social is what I'm going to use today during my demos. I'm going to use Spring Social Twitter, and Spring Social helps you use all these social API directly into your Spring code. And the most important to me, the newest cool thing about Spring is Spring Boot. Who has here heard about Spring Boot? Like Spring Boot is like one of the coolest, newest things in Spring. I remember like years ago when I first started Spring, I had to write those tedious XML files. I hate writing XML. And the cool thing about Spring Boot is now it's mostly annotation based. So it's just annotation on your code. That's what I'm going to show you today. Funny story, I heard some people saying that they've migrated their legacy application plays a Scala web framework to Spring Boot. So that's how new it is and how cool it is. They migrated some Scala Play app to Spring Boot. Quick word about Spring Data in itself. It binds sort of all the different data solutions with a common API. It doesn't mean that it's a very small scope. You can still use all the specifics of the solution you've chosen, but you have this kind of common interfaces, common languages to be able to group together the different data solution you're using, because it could make sense you'd be using a relational database with a NoSQL database. You could be using any like big data tooling, like maybe Hadoop, Spark, all these things. So they sort of give you a common interface, but they're not making you in a common interface prison. You still have access to all the good things, the good reason you've chosen your data solution for, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So as I said, this is a very code-oriented session, so that's almost the end of the slides, and I'm going to switch right into IntelliJ. I hope this is big enough. Again, if you're on the back and don't see it big enough, just come up the front. This is just a simple class, okay, all good. What I want to show you is the Maven file. Could be Gradle. I'm using Maven. Here I'm stating that my parent POM is Spring Boot Starter. The Spring Boot Starter is sort of gives you all the dependencies you need to start an application. It's pretty easy. I'm using Spring Boot Starter Social Facebook, so all the things I need to get started with the Facebook Social API. I'm using Spring Social GitHub, which I won't actually be using. That just should not be here. I'm using Spring Social Twitter, which this is what I'm going to use. And the most important for today's talk is those two dependencies, so Spring Data Command and Spring Data Couchbase. Spring Data Couchbase is very much of a community project right now. It's not an official Spring Data project handled by Pivotal. You know, Pivotal is the company behind Spring and Grails and many other cool stuff. So if you guys like Spring Data, you should make noise on the internet and make it more of an official project. You are more than welcome to do it. I'm using Spring Boot to start the test, and I have this cool project called Spring Data REST Web MVC, because Spring is not just about accessing your data solution, it's about making it accessible from the outside, and the Spring Data REST project is here for that. Like you have your Spring repository, and then it's automatically exposed as a REST endpoint, which is a very cool thing. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have. I'm using Java 1.8. Who is using Java 1.8 here? No one? Oh, okay, cool. Are you using it in production? Cool, 2%. That's not too bad, honestly. Usually it's all Java 1.7, so that's good. So I'm gonna jump right into a new step. I'm using Git because I don't like copy pasting code. This is very error prone, so I'm gonna reset my stuff first. And I'm gonna go straight to step 2. What is step 2? This is the minimum requirements, the minimum code you need, to have a connection to a Couchbase cluster, okay? So this is a Spring Boot app. I can just say enable auto configuration and add the configuration annotation. And you can see here that I'm extending one class called the abstract Couchbase configuration. This is the config class you need to obviously configure your access to the Couchbase cluster. It allows you need, when you extend it, to implement 3 methods. The method that gives you the default name of the bucket you want to connect to, the password of the bucket, and the seeds you need to connect to your cluster. So since I'm using Spring Boot, that's one cool thing. There's the value annotation. And the value annotation, if I do this, it's going to get the value directly into my application properties file. So here, that's where I've defined all I need to connect to my local Couchbase instance. So I have the local IP, the name of the bucket, that's default, and there's no password. So I can retrieve them, this code, and now I need to implement those methods, bootstrap host, the IPs of your cluster, the bucket name, bucket password. I'm using a Spring command line runner to run my code. It's just a simple command line runner, really. You just run code. So it's a bin, I'm injecting the command line runner. And since I'm using Spring Data Couchbase, there's a bin called Couchbase client. It's the Couchbase client you have on the Java SDK version 1.4.4 or something. So it's the first generation of the Java SDK. And I'm able to inject it as a bin because I'm using Spring Data, right? So I have my Couchbase client. I know it's connected because I've implemented the right method. And I'm just adding a simple document. The key is a key. There's a JSON file, and I'm then using the client to get the object I've just setted. So you should see it in the logs somewhere around here. That's it. I just got my object. If I go into my bucket, well, there's already some stuff in my bucket, but that's actually this object. But you can see that it's really encoded and not something you want. So I'm going to show you how to actually make that work. We had a question here. Yeah. Sorry? Is it still available in 2.x? The Couchbase client? Yeah, the Couchbase client is available in the first generation, which is synchronous, not using reactive Java. And you have the second version, which unfortunately is, as of now, not used in the Spring Data Couchbase project. I'm going to talk about it later on. It's on the roadmap. We're planning to have all the asynchronous reactive goodness on Spring Data. Many Spring projects have already added some features to support asynchronous programming. You have the default result object, all these cool things. So the good thing about reactive, the important thing about reactive is being reactive from top to bottom. So if just one piece of your stack is reactive, well, that's good, but that's not good enough. And the good thing about Spring is that they are slowly but really getting new synchronous stuff into all the Spring projects, which is great. So yeah, that's the really the only thing you need to have for your Spring project to be connected to a Couchbase cluster. You know, honestly, that's not that much code. As I told you, there is no XML anymore, which I feel great about it personally. So yeah, that's the minimum requirement. So I'm gonna check out the next step. And instead of using the Couchbase client, I'm going to use the Couchbase template. Here I have access to the Couchbase template because I'm extending the abstract config class, but I could just inject it just as I did previously with the Couchbase client. The Couchbase template is like a higher level wrapper around the classical Couchbase client, okay? And if you're using Spring and Spring Data, you want to store POJO objects directly into Couchbase. You don't want to have to write the JSON directly. You know, who wants to do that? So to do this, I'm creating a new object called Twitter update. It's like a regular Java POJO, annotated with Spring Data Annotation. So the goal of this project, again, is to use Spring Social Twitter to get the status of an account at a particular moment and store it into Couchbase, and that's what it does. So I have a Twitter update document. It's annotated with the document annotation. You can see that there's an expiry parameter. The default is 0, which means that this document will never expire, because since you're using Couchbase, you can set up a time to live in any object you store in Couchbase. So if I'm putting 300 here, it's going to have a time to live of 300 milliseconds. And the document is really to say to the Spring framework that this class is intended to be transformed as a JSON object and later stored with Spring Data into Couchbase. Couchbase is a key value store and a document store. So key value means you need to have a key, an ID. So that's why you have here, I have a key parameters. I have the ID annotation, which is basically telling Spring that the ID of my object will be the field key. And here the field, as I've set ID here, the value ID will be the name of the field in the JSON object. So if I remove ID in my JSON object, I will have something like key as a title name. Now I have ID, which is useful if you have really long variable name, but don't want to store them into your JSON object because your JSON object will get bigger and bigger and bigger. So as you can see, we have several types of objects, string, long. I'm actually storing a date as a long, it's an epoch unique style date. Integer by basically everything that's JSON support, right? So every parameters annotated with fields will be in the resulting JSON object in Couchbase. Basic constructor, basic getter and setter, basic toString thing, you know, just everything is automatically generated by IntelliJ. So that's my Twitter update object. And now I will use what I told you about the Couchbase template, which is the wrapper around the Couchbase client. I create a very simple Twitter update object, just some basic random numbers. And I'm calling the save method. It's going to save my object. Cool. Now I want to retrieve that object, but I still want to use the Couchbase template. Gives you a nice method called FanBy. You give it the key, it returns to you the object. But when it gets the object, it gets a JSON file or JSON object. It doesn't know in which class it can assign that JSON object. So I need to give it the Twitter update class parameters to make sure that when I call the FanBy method, I will actually get a Twitter update object back, really to translate your JSON object to your Java POJO that you had originally. Now I should be able to run that. See the results somewhere. There you go. I have my nice Twitter update object here. And if I go into the interface, this should have changed somewhere. That's key. You know, key was my key, so that's it. You can see that there's some underscore value. The underscore value are Spring-specific metadata. So Spring has added this for us. and that's just the name of the class I've been using. So that's nice, but we can do better, really. I don't want to have to give the name of the class each time I want to get an object. So I will be introducing another thing from Spring Data, and it's the Spring Data repository. If you're familiar with Spring Data, you know that's repository classes that gives you the CRUD method. So I've created a Twitter update repository, which is it's just an interface that extends CRUD repository interface from Spring. 2 parameters. I'm telling this interface that I intend to store Twitter update object, so that's the Twitter update here, and that the key is going to be a string. It's just an interface. I don't have to implement anything. As the beauty of using Spring is that you don't have to do the implementation yourself. So to do that, I've added the @enable Couchbase repository annotation on my config. And now each time I start the application, it will find the interface, and it will automatically implement that interface, mostly using the Couchbase Template object I've been using before, but it's going to hide the find one by ID method I had to give the Twitter update class. It's going to hide it from you. You won't have to do that anymore, which is what you can see. Where is it? Here. I've injected a Twitter update repository. I make sure I'm on a clean slate. I delete everything. I create a dummy Twitter update. I can save it just as before with the Couchbase template, but now if I want to get it, I don't have to pass the Twitter update.class object anymore, because the repository is parameterized, so it's really, really nicer, easier, and it just works, right? So if it's a repository, you have a wrapper and other method that you can directly save a list. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm creating 2 other Twitter updates, putting them in the list, saving the list directly. So that's some easy to do thing. I call the final method, and here I should have a problem, which is okay. Actually, that one's not okay. Interesting. Okay. So that problem was not expected. Let me just flush my bucket and start from the beginning. Flushing is basically emptying your bucket. Now I don't have any document anymore. I think this should work better now because I've did some weird stuff before. So hopefully this will be better. So there you are. I have my Twitter update method because I'm doing a find one. Oops. And here I'm calling the final method, and I'm logging everything. I'm using Java 8, so I can just call the for each method on the list, give it the lambda that's going to log the results of my final query. And if you're familiar with Couchbase, you know that before Nickel, when you want to do a query, there's several things to take into account. First, you need to create a view. So if I'm using a final, I'm retrieving a list of documents. If I want a list of documents, either I know all the keys and I do a bulk get, or I do a query. So if that works, that means that I've actually implemented the all final view into Couchbase. And before I run it, I just ran it again, I had just one result. And the final didn't log anything because of the view. I didn't set stale false, so the results were not consistent because that's how it is. And the thing about Spring is that it makes things easier, right? But the default parameters is stale to false. So I will need to force the stale to false parameters by using the low-level API again. So that's what I told you at the beginning. You are not in a prison with just the common interface between all the Spring Data projects. You can use the specificities of your solution. So in the next step, I will actually be able to use a query and set the parameter stale to false, and we'll have a consistent answer. But first, let me just quickly show you the view, I call the findAll method from my repository. The object is a Twitter update object, right? So in my views, I have a Twitter update design document and a view called all. And the view called all is just basically, this is the default view, taking all the documents and returning meta.id. To be honest, this works because I'm just storing Twitter update objects. So the method should actually be something like make sure that the current type of the document is equal to Twitter update. But anyway, that works anyway. So yeah, new step. I'm introducing two things here: a service, Twitter service, and a query. So let's first talk about the service. Just a Spring Bean annotated with service. You could use the add bean annotation. Add service is just like as a more a semantic meaning, telling that this bean is intended to be used as a service. Okay. So since I'm using Spring Data Couchbase, I can inject several stuff, like the Twitter update repository that I've been using before. You can see that I'm injecting an object called Twitter, and the object called Twitter comes from Spring Social Twitter, right? And it needs a bunch of parameters to work. So here I'm using the Twitter template. It needs a consumer key, a consumer secret, an access token secret. Just like my Couchbase parameters, I've added the right value. So now I need to add my parameters. Now I can run this, and this should get an update of my current Twitter account. So instead of having some dummy metrics, you can now see that I have favorited 181 tweets. This is the current date. I have 462 followers. If you want to help me grow up my number of followers, it's LDOGUIN. So, number of statuses, all the real use case thing, real life thing. So let's go back to the Twitter service and see how it works. I've configured my Twitter social access. So I've injected the Twitter object, which gives you a door to every REST API supported by the Spring Social Twitter project. So here I'm calling the user operations. I want a user profile, which is the Twitter account in the parameters. So that was my account. It gives you several, parameters. That's Twitter updates, the Twitter profile object. The Twitter profile comes from Spring Social Twitter. And with this, I am adding these parameters to my constructor. And there is something here that I didn't talk about before, which is a key. I used to just send a key like this and assume that this was going to work. If you are storing several social updates, maybe not just Twitter, you probably want some updates from, I'm a developer, so I want to update from GitHub, I want to update from LinkedIn, I want to update from anything else. Then you won't use just the timestamp when you did the query as a key. That's not going to work. So you need to have a way of storing your documents nicely. So here what I'm doing is I have key regex. It starts with TW for Twitter, dash the name of the Twitter account, dash the date I've created this thing. So if I go to my bucket, default document, there you go. I have my, should probably zoom that a bit, the object corresponding to my Twitter social query. What did I do with my log? Okay. So go back to my application. I've added this call to the service I just created. That's what you saw before. And now this query returns everything and is consistent because I've been using the It's a low-level API because I'm using Spring, so Spring is the reference, right? If you'll be using the SDK directly, it would be the normal API. So it's a bit slower, and I'm using the classic Spring, Couchbase SDK API, so creating a query object, making sure that it returns all the documents, putting the stale option to false because I want a consistent result, right? So if I'm writing some docs, it will be persisted asynchronously, just like Couchbase does, and it will be mapped by the views. The map reduce will run asynchronously too. So if I don't put the stale to false, the stale option to false, then it might not wait for my newly written results to be persisted and to be run through the map function so that my index has been updated. Now let's jump to the next step. Playing with the repository. So here I'm doing, I'm not calling the service anymore because if I do a loop of 1,000 calls of the Twitter service, then first my API limit will just blow off and it's going to be very long. So I'm just creating random documents with value from 0 to 999. That's what you have here. Still using the repository, creating a new Twitter update. And here I will be using another method, a new method called FindByDate. FindByDate is not something you get while extending the CRUD repository. The CRUD repository will give you a save, delete, update, find one by key, find all. And that all works with the key of your document. But the reason usually you're using Couchbase for document application is you want to do that a query on something else than the key. So here on my Twitter update repository interface, I've added two methods, one called FindByDate and one called FindFollowersByDate. They all return me a collection of Twitter updates, which makes sense because I'm still handling Twitter updates. But instead of using the ID, it's using something else. By date means I'm probably going to use the date. Followers by date means I'm probably going to use the date, but I don't want the document. I want it to return the followers, the number of followers. And it takes a query as an argument because if you're not doing a find all or a find one, maybe you want to paginate your query, or maybe you want just some subset of the final method. So you need to give a query object as a parameters to parameterize your query. So as I said, I have lots of documents, creating a new query, setting stale to false because I want the result to be consistent, and setting a range from 998 to 999, which will be the created parameters will be 1, 2, 3 until 999. So basically, I'm asking all the Twitter updates created from 998 to 999. So it should just return me two objects. And I'm going to use the FindByDate method, and this should fail miserably for one very simple reason, is that it did not find a view called byDate. So there is a convention that says that if the findAll method is looking for the view called all, the FindByDate method is looking for the byDate view, the FindFollowersByDate is looking for the FollowersByDate view, the find something will be looking for the something view, you get the point. So it's failing because it didn't find the view associated to the automatic implementation done by the Spring framework. That's okay, we can just create that view. So go into views, I'm going to create a new design document. Twitter update, by date, save. So what's by date compared to the final method? I'm lazy, I'm doing some copy pasting here. That's not this one, that's the one below. Still making sure that my document is of type Twitter update, in case you'll be storing all the stuff. That the created at value has been filled, it's not null. And in the emit call, instead of giving the ID as a key, I'm giving the creation date as a key, which will allow me to use the set range to use the date I've used. Okay. So I will save my view. Of course, it's a development view, so I need to publish the view. It's now in production, so I can run that thing, and it's going to fail again because I haven't implemented the followers by date view. But let's take a moment to see what happened. The first query did return to me 2 objects. And what I'm doing with these 2 objects is just logging the number of followers, which again is 998 because I've just randomly filled the values. So this won't work. Now the next query, just an example of again using a lower level API. The good thing about using Couchbase is that you can do map, but you can also do reduce, and reduce is going to give you like some statistics on the content of your index. Okay. Because you're using Spring, the set style to false option is not set by default, so you have to use a query object, and it's the same for the reduce option. When you call a query, by default in Spring the reduce is deactivated, so you need to, when you query the view, you need to have a query object that has reduce set to true to make sure you will actually get the reduce. Okay. So I'm going to implement that right now, the followers by date view. So the first view method I had was just by date. So it wasn't returning anything because when you get the results of a query, you always get the key of the document, so you can always get the document later. Here I want to return to have as a value of my index the number of followers because I intend to do some statistics on the followers value of all my documents, like the total number of followers between this date and this date, something like this. So if you're using a reduce, you need to set a reduce. So I'm going to set the stats reduce. It gives you a bunch of statistics about the value you're setting here. Let's again publish this. This will be overwritten. That's OK. Something good to do is actually would be to print out set value, because if I just get the value, it's not going to work. So I do the query. I have a view response object. A view response has some query, some view rows, which is usually the number of documents you get in the results. Since I'm using a reduce, I will only get one object, which is the result of the reduce. Okay, so I'm just calling the iterator, getting the next value, and logging the result. So if I save, this should probably work. And let's take a look at the result. So that's what you see here. I hope it's big enough. That's the, so I set the same range. Well, yeah, so I have 2 documents. So the reduce is going to be run across 2 documents. So the sum of 998 and 999 is 1,997. There is 2 documents. The minimum is 998. Maximum is 999. The square sum is these big numbers. Okay. So that's one of the cool things about using Couchbase, is that you can use the reduce appropriately when you need to. Right. Just need to remove some stuff. So each time I run the app previously, it was just quitting the app just after running the command line runner. That's not something I want to show you the next feature of Spring Data Couchbase. So the only thing I've added is, here I had a close method. I've removed the close method. So now if I run the server, sorry, if I run the application, it should keep on running, or not. Oh, right. So it's complaining because since I've removed my keys, you cannot find them. Need to add them back. Sorry. And if you remember, the first thing, one of the first things I showed you during the intro is that I had this very cool dependency, Spring Data REST Web MVC. So as you can see, the red button is here. It didn't quit the application, which means I have a server running, which probably means I can do something like get the server. Since I'm using Spring Data REST MVC, I just query the server and it gives me two endpoints. One is called Twitter updates, and I have this endpoint because I have a Couchbase repository. Like that's just the interface I've created in the beginning. And these Twitter endpoints will expose all the values, all the Twitter update objects I have on a REST 8OS fashion, which means that now I can query this endpoint. Without doing any typo, that'd be better. And when you call the endpoint without any parameters, it's just returned to you the complete list of objects so that you can see all the objects I've created randomly. And of course, since it's 8OS, you get the address of said object in the result, so you can just, again, query the result, and you get just all the objects exposed in a very cool REST fashion. Any questions so far? Yes, yes, yes. You in the back. Sorry? To several buckets? How do you connect to several buckets? Well, since you're using Spring, you can specify a configuration, different configuration depending on the package you're using, right? So this configuration here could be duplicated in another package, and it will be using the other configuration to another bucket. Yes? Sorry? Yeah, the Java class name is persisted. Yeah. So the question is, in the JSON, you have the name of the class persisted into the object. What happens if the class changes? Well, I believe it won't find the object. Oh, well. I need to make sure in the Spring code that it's actually checking out the underscore class value to make the. So under the hood is the Jackson mapping, and with the Jackson mapping, you need to give it the full name of the class. So I guess that's what it's using, and I believe it will just crash. Should probably crash. Yeah. Oops. So why the class is put in the object? The reason is to automate all the things I have showed you. Yeah, if you don't put the underscore class thing, you cannot do the automatic mapping from the JSON object you retrieve and the class you're expecting it to have. So, you know, it's mandatory to have it in Spring to do the automatic mapping. If you want to do the marshalling yourself, then yes, you can, and you'd be using the second version of the SDK, of Java SDK, for instance, would be great for that. But this just gives you the ability to not care about the marshalling, which is, I think, a good trade-off.
Does the Spring support inheritance?
What?
Inheritance.
Incurrence.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Father and son.
Oh, can you do father and son with Spring? The answer is no. Not right now. So, like, you would have an object. There would be an ID field referencing another object, and this would all be made automatically. The answer is no. Unfortunately, it's now. So quick last slide before you guys leave.
About
Just wait. I have a question slide before that, so sorry. If you like what you saw, just please check out the Spring Data Couchbase project. It will soon be again in active development, and the roadmap is moved to the second version of the SDK. Obviously, support all the cool stuff we have with Nickel because you have a query language in Spring Data, so it would be a very natural fit to get most of the cool thing you get in Spring Data. And if there's a feature you want, you would like what you just asked, please tell us because we cannot implement stuff if you don't tell us what you want to have in it. Okay, so please just send us an email. Go on the Couchbase forum, go on the mailing list, tell us what you want, and then we'll work something out. So yes, back to question, because I have like 3 minutes left.
the date time.
So yeah, the timestamp.
I've read that in order to make operations over the field with date time meters, the field name should be parsable less than date.
Yes. So when you're doing a views,
Yeah.
there's a function called date2array, and date2array takes the timestamp, and it gives you an array with the date, month, day, etc., right?
That it is compatible Spring with that kind of.
So yeah, when you do a view, and if you want to search by date, you call the date2array meant to have a key array of years, months, etc. If you're probably doing this because you want to do a range query, right? I want every document between this date and this date. So if you're doing a range query, you have a query object, and so it's perfectly compatible because it will call the right view because you called your method find by date, maybe by months or anything, and it still has a query object to which you can set the key, and the key could be what you want. So you can actually set the key array with the right year and the right month and the right, etc. So it is compatible. No more question? Yes?
Current Spring Data Couchbase, does it support the 2.1 version? Or that's what you were saying for our next SDK?
Currently, it supports only the Java SDK 1 generation, and
Java SDK,
yeah.
not talking about Couchbase version.
Oh, but Couchbase version. Any version that's Couchbase version that's supported by the first version of the Java SDK supported. So any version, really. Yeah. That's the end. So thank you all for coming to this session, and hopefully see you around. I will stick around if you have more questions. I'll be just here. Thank you. Yeah.
Is there going to be, you said to post stuff to ask for features. I think in the current version there's no support for paging and sorting.
There's no support for paging and sorting right now. Yeah.
So that'd be one of my asks, but I'll put it in the form.
That might happen once we have the next version of the SDK. You're the next?
Yes.